The darkness inside the cave smelled like death. Sergeant Takashi Yamamoto pressed his back against the cold volcanic rock and counted his remaining men. 12. Only 12 left from a unit that once numbered 43. Outside, American artillery shells screamed across the sky and exploded somewhere on a hillside above them. Each blast sent tremors through the stone, shaking loose, small pebbles that clattered down around the huddled soldiers. It was July 1944, and Saipan Island was dying. Takashi's throat burned with thirst. They had not found water in 6 days. The cave had no spring, no moisture except the thin film of condensation that formed on the walls each morning. Some men licked the stone like animals. Others had given up trying. Private Hiroshi, the youngest at 19, sat with his head between his knees, his lips cracked and bleeding. The boy had stopped asking when relief would come. Everyone knew no relief was coming. The Imperial Japanese Navy was gone. The supply ships were sunk. Saipan was surrounded by American vessels so thick a man could walk from ship to ship and never touch water. The rice had run out 8 days ago. Before that, each man received a handful per day, mixed with whatever they could scavenge from the jungle. Lizards, roots, insects. Takashi had watched soldiers die from eating poisonous plants, their faces turning purple as they choked. Now there was nothing left to eat. Lieutenant Koji had died 2 days earlier from a stomach wound that turned gangrenous. They could not even move his body. It lay in the deeper part of the cave, covered with a torn uniform jacket, attracting flies that filled the air with their angry buzzing. Takashi pulled a blood-stained envelope from his pocket. His wife's last letter, written 8 months ago before the mail stopped coming. She wrote about their daughter's 6th birthday, about the cherry blossoms blooming in their neighborhood, about rationing and air raid drills, and how everyone was doing their part for the emperor. She wrote that their daughter asked every night when Papa would come home. Takashi had written back with a lie. He told them he would return when Japan won the war. He knew even then that Japan could not win. The Americans had too much of everything. Too many ships, too many planes, too many men, too much food and fuel and ammunition. Japan had only one thing in abundance: soldiers willing to die. Outside the cave entrance, voices called in broken Japanese. American voices. They had been calling for hours, promising food and water and medical care, promising safety. Takashi knew it was a trick. Every soldier in the Imperial Army knew what happened to prisoners of war. The instructors in training had been very clear. Americans torture their captives. They cut off fingers one by one. They burned men alive. They fed prisoners to dogs. The Americans were demons, not humans. Better to die fighting than to surrender and face such horrors. Better to die with honor than to live in shame. But Private Hiroshi whispered something that made Takashi's chest tighten. The boy said he wanted to see his mother again. Just once. His mother was 70 years old and had no other children. Hiroshi said he did not care about honor anymore. He just wanted to live. Takashi should have slapped him for such words. Should have reminded him of his duty. Should have ordered him to prepare for a final charge. But Takashi's hand stayed at his side. He was too tired, too hungry, too thirsty, too empty of everything except pain that a sound echoed from outside. The metallic clank of something rolling across stone. Takashi grabbed his rifle, though he had only 3 bullets left. The other men stirred, reaching for weapons that would not save them. Something small bounced into the cave entrance and landed near their feet. A grenade. Takashi closed his eyes and waited for the explosion that would end everything. At least it would be quick. At least they would die together. But the grenade did not explode. Instead, white smoke began pouring from it, thick and choking. Tear gas. Takashi's lungs burned as he tried not to breathe, but his body betrayed him. He gasped, and the gas flooded into his throat. His eyes streamed with tears. He could not see, could not breathe, could not think. Around him, men stumbled and fell, coughing and retching. Someone screamed. Boots scraped on stone as soldiers tried to crawl deeper into the cave, but the smoke followed them. There was no escape. Takashi dropped his rifle. His hands clawed at his face as if he could tear away the pain. His legs moved without conscious thought, carrying him toward the cave entrance, toward the light, toward air. Strong hands grabbed his arms. American voices shouted words he could not understand. He was pushed to his knees on the ground outside. Fresh air hit his lungs, and he gasped like a drowning man. Through his tears, he saw American soldiers surrounding him, rifles pointed at his chest. This was it. This was the moment they would shoot him. He closed his eyes and thought of his daughter's face. He hoped she would remember him as brave. The bullet never came. Instead, hands lifted him to his feet and guided him down the hillside. Takashi's mind could not process what was happening. He was alive. He was a prisoner. And somewhere deep in his soul, beneath the shame and fear and confusion, a tiny spark of something flickered. Something that might have been hope, though he did not dare name it yet. Takashi woke to the feeling of clean sheets against his skin. For a moment, his mind refused to accept what his body was telling him. Clean sheets did not exist in war. He had slept on dirt, on rocks, on the floors of destroyed buildings, but never on clean sheets. His eyes opened slowly, adjusting to light filtering through canvas walls. He was lying on a cot in a medical tent. White bandages wrapped around his arms where jungle rot had eaten into his flesh. Someone had washed his uniform. Someone had given him water. His mouth no longer felt like sand. An American medic walked past, a young man with red hair and freckles across his sunburned nose. The medic glanced at Takashi, checked a chart hanging from the cot, and nodded. Just a simple nod that meant nothing and everything. The medic did not spit at him, did not hit him, did not even speak. He just moved to the next cot, where another Japanese soldier lay recovering from surgery. Takashi's mind struggled to understand. Where was the torture? Where were the beatings? The propaganda had been so clear, so certain. Americans were monsters. But monsters did not bandage wounds. Monsters did not provide medical care. The POW compound on Tinian Island held over 300 Japanese prisoners by late July 1944. Takashi learned this from other soldiers who had been captured weeks earlier. They told him the camp was organized, clean, and followed something called the Geneva Convention. Takashi did not know what that meant. They explained it was an international agreement about how to treat prisoners of war. Food, water, medical care, no torture, no executions. Takashi listened and did not believe them. It had to be a trick, a cruel game before the real suffering began. But days passed and nothing happened. No interrogations with hot irons. No bamboo shoots under fingernails. No dogs tearing at flesh. Instead, guards walked the fence line smoking cigarettes and talking among themselves. They did not point rifles at prisoners unless someone approached the wire. Japanese soldiers were allowed to walk freely within the compound, to sit in the shade, to talk to each other. Some even played a game with a ball that the Americans called baseball. Takashi watched them and felt his understanding of reality crack like thin ice. Private Hiroshi found him sitting outside the medical tent 3 days after their capture. The boy's infected leg wound had been cleaned, stitched, and properly dressed. He could walk without limping. "Sergeant," Hiroshi said quietly, sitting beside him, "they saved my leg." The American doctor said, "I would have died from gangrene if they had not treated it. Why would they save my leg if they planned to kill me?" Takashi had no answer. He stared at his hands and said nothing. The compound sat on a hillside with a view of the ocean. From here, Takashi could see the massive American invasion fleet anchored offshore. Aircraft carriers, battleships, destroyers, supply ships, hospital ships. So many vessels, they covered the horizon like a city floating on water. The sheer scale of American military power was crushing. Japan had nothing like this. Japan had sent him to war with a rifle, 60 rounds of ammunition, and a promise that the emperor's divine spirit would protect him. America sent its soldiers with flamethrowers, tanks, endless supplies, and medical tents that smelled of antiseptic instead of death. An American officer came to address the prisoners through a Japanese-American translator. The translator was a Nisei soldier, born in America to Japanese immigrant parents. Takashi had been taught that such people were traitors, confused souls who had betrayed their heritage. But the translator spoke perfect Japanese, better than some men in Takashi's unit. The officer said prisoners would receive 3 meals per day. They would get medical treatment. They could write letters home once Japan surrendered. They would not be harmed if they followed camp rules. The officer's face was serious, not mocking. He meant what he said. That night, Takashi could not sleep. The tent was quiet except for the soft breathing of other men. He stared at the canvas ceiling and thought about Lieutenant Koji dying in the cave, about the men who had chosen suicide charges rather than surrender, about the propaganda films he had watched in training that showed Americans committing terrible atrocities. Were those films lies? Or were some Americans different from others? He did not know what to believe anymore. His entire world had been built on certainty. The emperor was divine. Japan was righteous. Americans were evil. Surrender was shameful. Death was honorable. But now every certainty was crumbling. If Americans were not evil, then what was this war about? Why had 50,000 Japanese soldiers died defending Saipan for nothing? Why had he watched his friends starve and bleed and die in caves if surrender meant clean sheets and medical care? The questions burned in his mind worse than any wound. Private Hiroshi whispered from the next cot, "Sergeant, are you awake?" Takashi grunted. Hiroshi continued, "I have been thinking. If we had surrendered a month ago, Lieutenant Koji would still be alive. All those men in our unit would still be alive. We could have walked out of the jungle and lived. Instead, we hid and starved and died for nothing. Was our honor worth their lives?" Takashi wanted to tell the boy he was wrong, wanted to explain that honor mattered more than survival. But the words stuck in his throat because he no longer knew if he believed them. His mind was splitting into 2 pieces that could not fit together anymore. He was a soldier without certainty, a prisoner without understanding, a man adrift in a world that made no sense. 3 weeks in the camp taught Takashi that the body heals faster than the mind. His wounds closed. His strength returned. The rice porridge, canned vegetables, and small portions of fish came 3 times each day like clockwork. No man was starving. No man was dying of thirst. Some prisoners even gained weight, their faces filling out, their skin losing the gray pallor of starvation. But Takashi's mind remained shattered. He spoke little, wrote no letters, existed in a fog where nothing felt real and everything hurt. The food was bland but adequate. Standard military rations designed to keep soldiers alive, not to bring them joy. Takashi ate mechanically, his body grateful even as his soul remained numb. He could not shake the feeling that he was already dead, that his true self had died in the cave on Saipan, and his body walking around the compound was just a ghost wearing his face. The shame of survival pressed down on him like a physical weight. In Japan, his family would be marked. His daughter would grow up as the child of a coward who chose captivity over death. The thought made him want to stop eating, to will himself into the grave he should have found on the battlefield. An American chaplain visited the compound in early August, bringing news that made grown men weep. The Philippines would fall soon. The inner defensive ring of the Japanese Empire was breaking. American B-29 bombers were reaching the Japanese home islands now, dropping incendiary bombs on cities. Tokyo had burned. Osaka had burned. How many civilians had died? How many children like his daughter? The chaplain spoke through the translator with a gentleness that Takashi found almost unbearable. The man's kindness felt like a knife twisting in an open wound. Takashi did not want kindness. He wanted clarity. He wanted to know if his family was alive or dead. But the chaplain had no answers for individual soldiers. Only statistics. Only the terrible mathematics of total war. Some prisoners refused to believe the news. They said it was propaganda designed to break their spirits. Others cried quietly in their tents at night, grieving for a homeland that was being destroyed while they sat safely in an enemy prison camp eating enemy food. Takashi felt nothing. He had moved beyond grief into a vast emptiness where no emotion could reach him. Numbness was better than pain. Numbness was survival of a different kind. Private Hiroshi would not leave him alone. The boy talked constantly, asking questions that had no good answers. "Sergeant, we are alive. Does that not matter?" Takashi turned away. They should be dead. They had broken their oath to the emperor. But Hiroshi pressed on, his voice cracking. My mother is 70 years old, and she has no other sons. Who will burn incense at her shrine if I die? Who will care for her when she cannot walk anymore? Is my mother's life worth less than imperial honor? The question haunted Takashi because he had no answer. His own daughter needed a father. His wife needed a husband. But what good was a father or husband who had dishonored himself? Would they even want him back? The summer heat baked the compound during the day. Men sat in tense shade, playing cards with decks provided by the Red Cross. Some learned basic English from Japanese-American guards who seemed to exist in a strange middle space, neither fully American nor fully Japanese in the eyes of the prisoners. Others refused to speak at all, trapped in their own private hells. The camp had become a limbo between worlds. Not quite prison, not quite home. A waiting room for men who did not know what they were waiting for. In mid-August, the camp commander made an unusual announcement. The prisoners would receive what he called a special meal. The translator repeated the words, but they made no sense. What did special mean? Takashi felt his stomach twist with old fear, the kind of fear that lives in the animal part of the brain where reason cannot reach. Some prisoners whispered that it was poison. Others thought it was a test of some kind. Takashi did not know what to think. After weeks of numbness, fear had returned, and he almost welcomed it. Fear meant he was still capable of feeling something. American cooks arrived and set up large metal grills outside the mess tent. The smell hit the compound before anyone saw the food. Cooking meat. Rich, fatty, seasoned meat sizzling over flames. Takashi had not smelled cooking meat in over 2 years. His mouth watered instantly, an automatic response his body made without permission from his mind. His stomach growled so loudly that the man next to him laughed nervously. Takashi felt ashamed of his body's betrayal. He should not want enemy food. He should maintain some dignity, some resistance. But his body did not care about dignity. His body only understood hunger and the promise of something beyond bare survival. Guard called prisoners to form a line. Takashi's hands shook as he stood up. Around him, 300 men moved slowly toward the mess area, their faces showing confusion, curiosity, suspicion, and hunger. So much hunger. On a table sat rows of items wrapped in paper, still warm, steam rising from them. Next to the wrapped items stood rows of dark glass bottles with bright red labels. The bottles were covered in condensation, ice cold in the tropical heat. Takashi had not seen ice in 3 years, had not even thought about ice. The sight of those cold bottles made something crack inside his chest. He did not know what was happening, but he knew it was important. He knew that whatever came next would change everything. He shuffled forward in line, his heart pounding, and waited for the moment that would break him completely. The American cook had kind eyes. Takashi noticed this detail with strange clarity as the man handed him a paper-wrapped bundle and a cold glass bottle. Through the translator, the cook said 2 words that hung in the air like a prayer. Enjoy, friend. The word friend struck Takashi harder than any bullet. Enemies did not call each other friend. Demons did not wish their captives enjoyment. Yet here was this man with flour on his apron and sweat on his forehead, smiling as if feeding hungry people brought him genuine pleasure. Takashi took the items with trembling hands and walked to a bench under a canvas awning. He could not look at the other prisoners, could not meet anyone's eyes. If he saw his own confusion reflected back at him, he might shatter completely. The paper wrapper was still warm. The bottle was so cold it hurt his palm. Takashi set the bottle down and slowly unwrapped the paper. Inside was something he had never seen before. A soft white bun held together a thick patty of seasoned ground beef, glistening with juice. Melted yellow cheese draped over the meat. Fresh lettuce, bright green and crisp. Sliced tomato, red and ripe. Small green discs of pickles. A red sauce that smelled sweet and tangy all at once. The Americans called it a hamburger. The translator had said, a sandwich made from beef and vegetables and cheese, food that people ate when they were happy, when they were celebrating, when they were allowed to be human. The smell overwhelmed him completely. Takashi's vision blurred. His hands shook so violently he nearly dropped the burger. This was not prison food. This was not survival rations. This was something created with care, with attention, with the assumption that the person eating it mattered, that they were worth the effort of fresh vegetables and melted cheese and a soft bun. For 3 years, Takashi had eaten rice balls that broke his teeth, dried fish that tasted like cardboard, and whatever he could scavenge from the jungle. He had forgotten that food could be more than fuel, had forgotten that eating could be anything other than a desperate attempt to stay alive one more day, that he took a small bite. The flavors exploded in his mouth with such intensity that his knees went weak. The sweetness of the sauce mixing with the salt of the beef. The coolness of the lettuce against the warmth of the meat. The tang of the pickles. The smooth richness of the cheese. His taste buds had been dormant for so long that they screamed back to life all at once. His throat struggled to swallow. His teeth hurt from chewing. But he took another bite. And another. Each bite undid another lie he had been taught. Each bite showed him a truth he had not wanted to see. Around him, men were crying. Not quiet tears that could be hidden. Loud, gasping sobs that echoed across the compound. Private Hiroshi sat on the ground with his hamburger half-eaten in his lap, his shoulders shaking with the force of his weeping. Other men tried to hide their faces. Some gave up pretending and wept openly. Takashi felt wetness on his own cheeks and realized he was crying too. He could not stop. Did not want to stop. The tears were washing something away, some poison that had been sitting in his soul for years, that he picked up the bottle. Coca-Cola, the label said in English letters. He twisted off the metal cap, and the fizz burst out with a sharp hiss. The smell was sweet, almost medicinal, but pleasant. He raised the bottle to his lips and took a careful sip. The cold, carbonated liquid hit his tongue, and he gasped out loud. It was like drinking lightning, like drinking joy, like drinking a world where wars did not exist and people lived their whole lives without ever tasting fear. The sweetness was almost too much. The carbonation made his nose tingle, but he could not stop drinking. He finished half the bottle in 3 long gulps and had to set it down because his head spun and his stomach protested the sudden flood of sugar after so long with only rice porridge. Takashi understood now with a clarity that cut through all confusion. The war was not what he thought. His enemies were not what he thought. The propaganda had been lies from beginning to end. Americans were not demons. They were men who made hamburgers for their prisoners, who added cheese and pickles because they believed even enemy soldiers deserved something good, who gave cold Coca-Cola on a hot day because kindness was possible even in war. Every bite of the burger destroyed another certainty he had built his life around. Every sip of the Coca-Cola showed him that the world was bigger and stranger and more complicated than any officer's speech had ever acknowledged. Private Hiroshi sat down next to him. Both men were still crying. They did not speak. Words were too small for this moment, too inadequate to capture what was happening inside their chests. They just sat together on the bench, 2 soldiers who had survived when they should have died, eating hamburgers that tasted like freedom, drinking Coca-Cola that tasted like peace, and letting their tears wash away the lies that had almost killed them. Takashi thought about his wife and daughter. Tonight, he would write them a letter. He would tell them he was alive. He would tell them he had surrendered. He would tell them he was not ashamed anymore, because survival was its own kind of honor, its own kind of courage. He would tell them about the hamburger and the Coca-Cola, though they would not understand. How could they? You had to taste it yourself. Had to feel the moment when food stopped being just food and became proof that humanity still existed somewhere beneath all the killing and dying. The sun began to set over the Pacific Ocean, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. Takashi finished his hamburger slowly, savoring each bite, and drank the rest of his Coca-Cola in small sips that burned his throat with their cold sweetness. He did not know what tomorrow would bring. Did not know when the war would end or if he would ever see Japan again. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, his stomach was full. His thirst was quenched, and deep in the broken places of his heart, something that had died began very slowly to grow back. He felt human again, and that was worth more than any empire, any honor, any war. That was worth surviving for.